This particular lecture is going to be dealing with the Virgin Suicides both in text and in film. We've read the novel and hopefully you've seen the film. Need to have seen the film before you do this lecture or you won't be able to understand it very well. And we're going to be focusing in on three themes that certainly exist in the novel, and I would argue that they are themes that Sofia Coppola, the director, who incidentally also wrote the screenplay, seems to be keyed in on as well. This is not necessarily something that is highly controversial. I think most people who read it, and certainly who see the film, will see that there are three themes here that both the text and the film seem to pick up on. If we accept that these are some of the novel's themes, it can help us guide our discussion of Coppola's film adaptation. And specifically, we can ask the question, does Sofia Coppola see the novel as being principally concerned with these themes as well? I think she does, and I'm going to make the case for that. You can disagree if you want to. We'll have an online discussion a little bit later on. But I think a great case can be made that that's exactly what she is concerned with as well, those particular themes. If so, how does that inform her presentation of the work? And the themes are essentially adolescent angst, death and loss as a multifaceted presence, and that the sense of death or loss, or you can say the two together, maybe that same concept together, as being a presence throughout the novel and throughout the film, but also having different faces or multifaceted. And then the paradox of ambiguity. Reality is ambiguous. Our experiences are ambiguous, versus the need to comprehend and make meaning and to understand. I'm going to try to do this in just a couple of videos, part 1 and part 2, if I can make it all the way through, we'll see. Okay, so picking up with the first theme of adolescent angst, you see it throughout the novel, but you really sense it and feel it in the film. The Lisbon home, for example, well, there's a pervasive sense of awkwardness all throughout. One of the things that frustrates a lot of sort of novice film viewers when they see a film like this is they say, it was so slow and there was just not a lot. I mean, it took forever. And it was really what they're saying is the characters and the director and the scenes and the delivery of the dialogue wasn't what they were used to, and that's on purpose. The home, the setting, wasn't what they were used to. The setting of the home is this kind of immaculate, everything's in its place, nothing's really expensive or elaborate, everything's almost kind of cookie cutter, like the entire place was furnished out of, J.C. Penney or someplace like that. And even one of the characters in the novel says they probably tried to kill themselves to escape the decor of the place, because it's so cookie cutter, it's so humdrum, it's so very cliched, and not very attractive. It's just kind of very, very plain vanilla kind of style of furnishings and everything else. It's a nice home, it's a very ample home, but the home itself becomes a very important sort of presence in both the novel, but especially in the film, because Coppola is able to sort of constantly bring us back into the home and out of the home, and then there's the dichotomy of the characters who can't come into the home versus the characters who can't get out of the home, and it's this sort of bubble existence. But I want you to think also about the constant talk about religious things throughout here, especially the fact that the Lisbon family is very Catholic, at least nominally so, at least in terms of their actions, etc., their particular belief system. Different story. Mr. Lisbon has that famous line where he says, I can't believe that they believe this crap, where he evidently loses his faith or never had a very sincere or devout faith. They just kind of go through the motions. The mother is more embracing of the moral strictures of religion as opposed to some very deeper understanding of life and faith, which they do not have, because if they had it, then the tragedy that first hits them would be something that they would turn to that in order to find some sort of comfort or meaning. The priest's visit to the house, for example, is largely ineffectual. But the Lisbon home itself is an important sort of symbol of the divide between their internal world and the external world, and the people outside of their home and their family who really cannot fathom what's in there, and they're only given brief glimpses. And I want you to think also in terms of this. These are 5 young girls. Obviously, the title is The Virgin Suicides, etc. It becomes kind of like a like a convent of nuns, where you have a mother superior there, and they're all cloistered, and they live a sort of a life of cloistered, piety and abstinence and that kind of thing, and it's kind of imposed from the top down within their family. There's also an awkwardness, obviously, between the characters. Parties, the party, the school, at the school, the dance, the conversations that take place. They're at the dance, and one of the sisters is dancing with a guy. She has no idea what to say. She has no idea how to have a conversation with a boy. It's kind of cute and funny, but, how's the weather? Nice weather we're having, etc. Even Mr. Lisbon is incapable of having a really meaningful conversation. He wants to have conversations and relate to young men because he didn't have any boys, right? He's like, I want to do some boy talking, right? So he shows them the model planes and stuff, but they lose interest and he kind of trails off. Trip doesn't want to see the glider. He just kind of leaves the room really quickly, and Mr. Lisbon's left there holding the glider plane. Very interesting thing, if you caught it, I hope you did. When Trip asks Mr. Lisbon, "Can I take your daughter to the prom?" and of course Mr. Lisbon in his classroom says, "Oh, I don't know about that," etc. They begin to start talking this awkward talk about football, and James Woods, fantastic actor, just a terrific actor. Don't confuse characters with the actors who portray them. This character is really just awkward and stiff, but the actor is brilliant in being able to pull it off that way. There's a great line that when they're talking about positions, what position do you play? Well, I play, cornerback. He said, well, I played safety when I was in high school. And Tripp says, very important position. There's nothing between you and the goal line when you play that position. And if you know anything about football, safety is the defensive position that's the farthest back, right? And his job, he's the last guy who can stop a runner or a guy carrying the ball on the offense from getting into the end zone. In other words, it's kind of this funny little, subconscious, essentially Mr. Lisbon is the guy who's supposed to keep boys from scoring. He's the last line of defense on the football team, right? You're the only one between the ball carrier and the end zone, right? You got to stop them. So even they're not even aware of the irony of some of the things that they're saying. Another big thing, music, so important in the film. A novelist can talk about it and can refer to it, but it doesn't really do as much for you as a film can do. The telephone music scene where they're going back and forth playing songs and they're communicating to one another through pop music songs. It is one of the longest scenes in the film. And I think that is a great decision on Coppola's part, because it encapsulates better than almost any other scene the adolescent character's inability to use words to communicate and give meaning to their feelings and experiences. Sorry about the slide there. It should say inability to use words. In other words, words alone are not enough. They have feelings as adolescents. They have experiences that they can't quite fully articulate yet. Even as adults, they won't be able to do it fully, but much more so when they're an adolescent, that they just can't seem to make words count. Now, there's another reason for it, and that's obvious. They're not supposed to have conversations with boys on the phone, right? But this becomes this kind of vehicle. Music becomes a vehicle or a medium that helps them overcome the ineffectiveness of words to sum up their thoughts, their feelings, their experiences. The slow pace of the film. If you say, this film is boring, these people don't, and nothing happens, they just kind of drift around and float around, etc. That's the point. That's what she wants you to feel. The slow pace, the kind of boredom, the ennui, the banality of their existence. They just sit around. Remember when Mr. Lisbon's sitting in his recliner and the priest comes in and he's watching the ball game? He does not want to talk about it. He doesn't want to deal with it. He would rather stare at a blue screen with baseball, the slow pace of baseball reinforcing the slow pace of their lives, the meaninglessness. They have this long, boring existence punctuated by horrible, painful tragedy. And the dialogue, the scenes, the interaction of the characters, Coppola's trying to recreate that. The inability of the psychiatrist played by Danny DeVito to actually get anything out of Cecilia. He just kind of sighs and smokes his cigarettes, and he just kind of goes through the motions as though what he's doing doesn't really have any effect. It doesn't have any meaning. He's not connecting. These characters can't connect with one another. And Coppola wants you to feel uncomfortable, just like the teenage characters. She wants you to experience the situations where language doesn't seem to work well. If you feel uncomfortable, if you feel bored, if you feel awkward, Coppola is saying, good, that's what I wanted you to feel, because that's what my characters, or the characters in the novel, are feeling as well. The third thing here, death and loss as a multifaceted presence. The loss of the elm trees, the loss of freedom, the loss of a way of life in a declining culture in the 1970s, where that kind of cookie-cutter neighborhood, that sort of 1950s, happy-go-lucky sort of suburban existence was beginning to change. It was giving way. The drug culture, the crime, the economic malaise, all of those things were taking place, and you see it in a lot of different ways. Obviously, the title, The Virgins Who Die. The use of the term virgin, it's not just about sexuality, obviously, but it's about this loss of a future or potential for these girls. They died before they ever experienced anything. They died before they ever experienced even a first true love. They died before growing up and getting married and having a family and having a career and having a future, and all those things they lost because, well, of course, they took their own lives. The lack of a loss of virginity, except for Lux, obviously. The other girls are lacking in a particular loss, right? Which itself is a loss, right? So you may say you lose your virginity, etc. You're actually sort of gaining something, or by not losing your virginity, you're not gaining something, which is an experiential thing, etc., etc. You don't have to go into all of that, but we'll leave that to the psychiatrists as well. But there's this sense that they never experienced much of life. They lived their whole lives sheltered in this sort of house that never let them get out. They had to dream about traveling. They couldn't actually do it. They sent away for brochures to travel, and they actually couldn't do the traveling. They couldn't do the things they wanted to do, and the parents put them on lockdown mode. Now, we were talking in class a little bit about this earlier, and that is, okay, so the surface level or direct explanation for why they would do this is, well, their parents were too strict with them, etc. And that's, you can approach it that way, but then there's also a deeper level, a deeper question about it, and is, why did they experience this loss? We'll get to that in a few minutes, but it has something to do, I think, with this crucial scene where Tripp abandons Lux, and of course everybody who reads the novel and everybody who watches the film says, why did he do this? Why would he do such a thing? He doesn't know why he did it, but I would contend that it feeds right back into this sense of loss, that once he has consummated this relationship, once they have sex on the football field, he has lost something. He has. We say, well, he's a jerk because he left. Of course he is, of course. But he doesn't understand. You see this? He doesn't understand why he did it. He doesn't understand. But you and I, if we're thinking about it, we realize he lost something. See that picture there of Lux winking at us through the clouds, this kind of dreamy, misty fantasy? She's a fantasy to him in some ways. And now that he's actually consummated, she's not a fantasy anymore. She's a real-life person. And he's been in love with something that wasn't real. And now he realizes, oh gosh, so this is who she is? Well, okay, I mean, she's great. And afterwards, later in rehab, he says, she was a great person. She was wonderful. I don't know why I did this. But you and I, if we think about what he did, we can actually tell that the reason is not because he doesn't like her. It's because he never really was in love with her. He was just infatuated with this image he had created. I mean, after all, the moment that he falls for her is when he's high as a kite on dope. But of course, this is what immature people do, right? Until you get farther along in life and you look back like Tripp does from rehab saying, what in the world did all that mean? I don't know. What does that say about me? How could I have lost something so precious? He lost his fantasy that night, and then later in life, he lost an opportunity with somebody. So it was a double loss for Tripp. And it's his own darn fault. But then again, he's a stupid kid, okay? One of the things that I want you to recognize here, and I think this is brilliance on Coppola's part. I'm really impressed with this. If you know anything about artwork, the sculpture there over to the right below is called the Pietà by Michelangelo. It's in the Vatican. It's a very, very, very famous sculpture, and there have been many like it. It's the scene of Mary holding the dead body of Jesus before he is buried, and there is this sense of resignation, of sadness, of loss. Obviously, the death of the innocent Christ, himself a virgin, and the Virgin Mary, right, who is bemoaning and grieving and trying to make sense of why such a thing would happen to her son, an innocent person, a holy person, a pure person. And Coppola makes sure that we get echoes of this when she gives us the shot of Mr. Lisbon holding his child who has died. Now, obviously there's a practical reason for it, and that is he's trying to suspend, because it's gross, and he's trying to suspend her there. But the way he holds her, the way he looks at her, the way the camera treats it, it is a reverse Pietà. Instead of a male who has died being held by his mother, it's a female who has died being held by the father. And so it's a reversal of that. Meanwhile, the mother involved in this, the only real scene we see after the fact, after she discovers it, is this one where her back is turned. And so the father seems to be the compassionate, caregiving, maternal figure in here. The mother has her back turned to the priest when he walks in. Very important to notice details like that. Well, our last slide here is where we're going to get into some really deep whys, and I'm going to try to squeeze this into one video instead of the two, like I said. There's a paradox involved. Both the novel and the film seem to key in on this notion that the paradox of life, and adolescence in particular, is that we are thrust into a world where we are forced to make sense of circumstances that seem random or irrational. We're in a world where stuff happens and we can't figure out why it happened. We can't make it have meaning. We need to make meaning, but we're incapable of doing it. The episode, this episode in these boys' lives is a metaphor for this aspect of the human condition. Think about that for a moment. That this is not just about boys and what happened to them with some people they knew, some girls they knew. This is a metaphor for our particular condition as human beings, that we are always and constantly confronted with a world where things happen and we cannot understand why, and we cannot understand what they mean. But we are also driven as a species to make meaning. We survive because we make meaning. We get ahead in life. We build civilizations because we give things or invest things with meaning. The collection of exhibits that the boys have, the diary that they read that provides basically nothing useful, just random facts, the ineffectiveness, as I said, of both the psychiatrist and the priest. They don't seem to be connecting with these characters and helping them through this grief. It's not working. The impotence of adults and other authority figures to solve problems or provide meaningful answers. They can't. They're incapable of it. They're totally impotent in that regard. The great question of the novel is why? Why did this happen? Why did these girls do this? There's a simple answer, and that is, gosh, their parents just were really crappy parents, and their mom was horrible, and they did all the wrong things in raising. Yep. Right, got it. But there's a deeper question of why, as in, why do these things happen? And we can't answer that question. All we can do is relive it and take in the sadness and the deep sense of loss of the potential that they had, and that's all gone now with their deaths. And I think there's a sub-point to this too, and I'll end on this, and that is that there's something going on, and Coppola is able to do this very effectively visually, maybe even more so than what Eugenides does in the novel, and that is to show us, to let us experience how fantasy is an alternative and created reality. When the boys are thinking, we're going to take them on a road trip, we're going to go here, we're going to do this, we're going to go live these lives of this is nonsense. They're not going to do this. Of course, they're adolescents, and adolescents fantasize. They have no sense of a mature sense of reality in that sense. But we create fantasies because we have such difficulty making meaning out of life. That problem, that paradox up above, our coping mechanism is fantasy. It's real, our fantasies are real to the extent that we invest our beliefs and hopes in them. But our fantasies fail to hold together in the end. They fall apart because they're not based on anything other than hope and assumption. We have to imagine what we cannot know, the mysteries and the unsolved questions in our lives, because it's all we have. Think about that. Going to have a discussion online. I'll send you some instructions about it.